Good morning, Null Channel, or whatever time it is. It's morning, because that's what time it is for me. And so I'm going to subjugate all of you to a good morning, whether it's been half your workday or all of your workday. Welcome to the show. If you don't know, if this is going to be your first time watching this is just a time that I made so that I could hang out with you guys and go over some of the news and talk about some of the tech news that has been going on out there. And so, yeah, it's a time to hang out, a time to discuss some of the stuff that's going on, and move on like that. That being said, I do kind of generally break it into about 3 or 4 sections. So at first, we're going to go over security and security advisories and things like that. Then we're going to talk about cloud and cloud news and things like that are happening in that. This covers AWS, Azure, GCP, Linode, and DigitalOcean, and all of those. Although a lot of those smaller ones show up a lot less often. And then we go on to kind of the random open source news. And then the very last thing there is going to be project shoutouts. And so like today, we're going to go over what I think are the most important Rust libraries if you want to get into Rust. Just so that, sometimes when you get into a new language, it's hard to know what libraries do what and which ones you solve the problems that you're looking to do. So we're going to cover that in the project shoutout. And a lot of the times we have a lot of CNCF projects in there and Kubernetes based ones. So if that sounds like something you'd like, if that's interesting to you, stick around and we'll be doing that. Now, as always, I'd like to start these things out with a word, not from our sponsor, but from me personally. As always, all opinions here are those of my own, that of my own. I have not been asked to say anything, paid by anyone, and all opinions are that of my own, and they do not reflect my current, former, or future employers. All right, now that that's out of the way, let's move on. Feel free to bring up anything in chat. I will try to keep an eye on chat. I will be moving forward through the news, but yeah, let me know if you have anything, and I'll try to make sure I bring it up. So for the very first thing, I generally start with clickbait, and this time I didn't do any clickbait, which is probably why I have fewer viewers right now. If you like the non-clickbait title, go ahead and hit that like button right now. That would help me out. Not really, but it would make me feel better when I get more likes than I get dislikes on a video. So anyways, go ahead and hit it. But if instead of doing that, I found something that actually made me feel a little bit better about the human race as a whole. So I thought, you know what? Is it tech related at all? Not at all. Not at all. A Polish Olympian won a silver medal and auctioned it off to save a small infant's life. But it doesn't even stop there. The person who won the auction to save the child's life refused the medal. So it was all around a great story. And I was touched by it. And I hope that other people actually act like this. Why can't we just save as many infant lives as we can? So great work to these people. I will actually put their link into it, but it has nothing to do with technology, so we'll move on. But I wanted to start out with that. So let's start with security. My most funny security issue that I saw was this. So this was basically a 3D printer's or a printer's you could use your printer from the cloud, and basically because of a bad load balancer reconfiguration, exposed the IP addresses of the printers so that people could print on other people's printers. Really funny that this came out was that somebody basically printed, it's not secure, I randomly connected, sorry, I had to inform you. Pretty funny. So Anyways, this just goes to show the importance of proper configuration. So if you're looking at making load balancers, you don't even necessarily think about load balancers as being a failure point in security, but this just goes and proves that pretty much everything can be the point of security, a security failure. So make sure that, and you know what, honestly, going back to last week, we were talking about the NSA's recommendations for securing Kubernetes, and a lot of that was configuration. A lot of today's security. Now, I'm not saying all of it. There's a lot, and we'll talk about some of those in the future. But a lot of stuff goes through configuration, whether it's securing your Kubernetes control plane or just configuring your load balancers. There is so much security in configuration. And this is why I love tools that actually look for security in your configuration. All right, let's move on to this. This was something, you know what? I just want to warn all employees, it will be really easy to find the employee, not necessarily the attackers. So don't fall for this. Because it will be easy to track down what employee did this. And yep, but it's kind of interesting, a new approach. People are trying to talk, instead of actually doing a phishing, they're very legitimately saying what they're doing, and they'll give you a 40% cut. I would highly recommend not doing this. One, because it's just immoral, but two, also because you will be tracked down as the employee that released it on it. So do not respond to this email for a lot of reasons. All right, Google has for a while been having some problems with Chrome. I'm not quite sure why, but it seems that Chrome has had, over the last 2 or 3 months, I haven't really mentioned them because, applications get security updates and that's not a big deal, but Chrome has been repeatedly, like every 2 weeks, releasing a patch for security issues. So I thought I would bring it up because you really need to patch, especially if you haven't updated in the last couple of weeks. There are 9 in this last one, with all ranked high in the security. So do make sure, if you're using Chrome and not the more superior Firefox, that you patch. And Firefox is awesome as long as you don't use it for... I'm on Linux, so like I use Google Meets and stuff on... and they don't have like a native client, and if you try to do it in the browser, Firefox is horrible for that. All right. Anyway, so make sure you've patched your Chrome recently. All right, so this was something that I found interesting, and this basically goes back to hardware design. And, we saw this happen with processors. And processors make sense as to why, the Spectre and Meltdown, you can go to those, but there's actually been more since the Spectre and Meltdown as we really start to dig in and understand hardware security. And this has been, this is a new one where basically you wouldn't have necessarily thought about it, but this is the Realtek SDK for their hardware, their Realtek chipsets that are embedded everywhere. I mean, I couldn't tell you how many of these are out there because they're everywhere. Basically, yeah, there's a bunch of different vendors, 65 vendors affected by it, and a bunch of hardware. So if you're interested in hardware vulnerabilities, I would definitely check this out as, it's hardware vulnerability. Moving on in security, here is another misconfiguration. Like I said, configuration so often is the thing that bites us. This time, I kind of feel like this wasn't that bad. I feel like our terrorist lists are kind of known anyways, but basically a watch list of suspected terrorists, I wasn't on it. That was surprising. How many times I get searched at the airport would make me believe I'm on a terrorist watch list, because I always get searched. Anyways, was leaked. So yeah, and it was by a misconfigured service. And this is what, again, I think it's an understated attack vector, misconfiguration. All right, this was interesting at the least, and I wanted to share it with you guys. You know, a lot of people talk about quantum, the reasons quantum technology, and once we can make affordable quantum computers, is going to wreck our current encryption standards. And here's a group that's working on quantum cryptography that's going to basically make quantum safe encryption. So it's not a quantum encryption, that's a different type of encryption, but it's basically making standard computers safe against quantum attacks. The really cool part here is it actually uses the RISC-V chip. So yeah, the RISC-V standard, they built this piece of hardware based off of that. And so it's pretty cool. It's definitely worth a read, and I'll be putting it in the links in the description. So let's move on to cloud. Anybody have anything else they saw regarding security? All right. So let's move on to the cloud. Here we have a couple things from Amazon, and actually all the cloud vendors have a few articles. We're going to touch really high level. We're not going to spend a ton of time on them. If you guys don't know what Amazon SageMaker is their ML pipeline machine. It's their service for machine learning. Anyways, they have a new inference, asynchronous inference, and so basically they made a new asynchronous inference option for workloads that have a very large payload size and long processing times. So if you're using SageMaker and have been struggling with their lack of this support, this is something you'd want to check out. So this is something I thought was interesting, is everybody talks about how AWS is killing open source. Well, Postgres has never once had their community under fire because of AWS, because for Postgres, the open source project is all about community. So guess what? They have no problem, and AWS brings fantastic Postgres support to their server. Another reason I love Postgres. So anyways, these are the Postgres versions currently supported by Amazon. So yeah. And then, yeah, Redis is not going to be happy about this. Redis, basically, Amazon made a API layer compatibility with Redis. So now you can you can use Amazon MemoryDB with the Redis. So basically, my understanding, I haven't tried it with this, but my understanding here is that you can use it as a one-to-one replacement with Redis, and can hold up to 100 terabytes of data in memory using the Amazon MemoryDB. So pretty cool, and if that's something you're looking into, I don't know exactly how much it costs. It probably costs a lot, but you should check it out if you use Redis and you need something that's a little bit more managed. Although Redis does have a managed solution itself, so I would compare the two pricing wise and see which one works better for you. Of course, I always recommend supporting the open source. So sometimes maybe paying a little bit more to support that is good, but I leave that up to you guys and what's the best business decision for you. Let's move on to Google. All right, so, okay. This is basically just Cloud Run. Sorry, the line break here was confusing me. I was reading it in Cloud, run with VPC services, and I was like, forget what. Okay, basically this is bringing more functionality to Cloud Run. If you don't know what Cloud Run is their Cloud Run is their Lambda functions, their serverless architecture, and basically brings VPC service controls to Cloud Run. So if you're trying to manage a lot of your stuff using Cloud Run, which actually I think is one of the greatest uses of lambdas and serverless architecture. Short little rant here. I think that serverless and those things are fantastic. But I don't think that they reduce complexity a lot of the times, or aren't used to reduce complexity and can actually lead you to a more complex architecture, which I really hate complexity, and I harp on that a lot. And so I think actually one of the greatest uses of something like Cloud Run or anything to do with serverless architecture are these little things that are ancillary and support your infrastructure as a whole, whether it be VPCs or things like that. I think that this is an excellent example of where it is super powerful and actually makes it simpler, because your architecture, you don't want a whole service to manage X, Y, or Z. If it can be handled in one or two microservice functions, which really they're just really small microservices as functions. But too often I see them used a little bit sprawling. Anyways, GCP adds more support for Cloud Run. All right, I've talked about Zero Trust a lot. Beyond Corp is Google Cloud's Zero Trust, which I don't know why. Beyond Corporation, I guess it should really be called Beyond Office, but it's really used even inside the office. I don't understand the naming here. Naming is hard though, so I won't harp too much. But Beyond Corp is their zero trust solution. Kind of think of Beyond Corp as a Cloudflare of GCP that's locked down to just GCP. Anyways, they added new enterprise features, which I don't understand. Zero Trust is enterprise, period. So new enterprise features is a little bit of a weird oxymoron to me. But basically, it goes on to certificate-based VPC controls and a couple other things with on-prem. It's really good. You should definitely be using Zero Trust in your enterprise if you can afford to do so. I say afford to do so. It's expensive and takes effort. It's expensive because it takes human effort. So while it's definitely something you should be striving for, I don't think that your 5-person team can really actually support Zero Trust without paying somebody like Cloudflare or BeyondCorp, which then is expensive. All right, this is... Oh, okay. So they just added this managing on-premise managing transfer for on-premise jobs. This is something new that was added. Basically, it adds a RESTful API for your transfer of on-premise data workflow. So pretty cool if that's something you're doing. If it's not something you're doing, it's completely useless. All right, and then they released this new certificate authority. This actually goes back into the Beyond Corp because it's actually what's used there. So yeah, it's definitely if you're looking at providing certificates and looking for a CA, they now have a certificate authority. Now, I don't know how much this is going to cost because there's Let's Encrypt, which is also a CA, and you can get your certs signed there. But the nice thing here is that you might have a very nice pipeline if all your other stuff is in GCP, and you can get your certificates signed in GCP in one workload or one pipeline. This might actually make things like compliance easier because it's easier to prove and to sort, and everything would be under one. So it might be something you look at, even if it costs a little bit. All right, let's move on to Azure. So first, I want to tell you why I don't cover more things in Azure. There are things that are really horrible to actually filter through. Like they have a lot of like I would call this advertising. Like it's not really like new features, and then you can click on Azure Updates, which brings you here, which is pretty good, but it's also very verbose. Anyways, like yeah, Tomcat 7 reached end of life. Anyways, the coolest thing that I saw recently was this. the version 2 of Azure Cosmos DB .NET SDK, so just the SDK, will be retired in 2024. Azure does a fantastic job of letting you know way ahead of time that something's going to go out of support, and they have version 3 of the SDK, which has been released, so you should go ahead and migrate to it in the next 2 years. Well, two and a half years? It's a long time. So don't worry. And you're fine. Anyways, not a whole lot of interesting news for Azure. Let's move on to some more general cloud stuff. So Kata, that's what I call it at least, is a Kubernetes event-driven auto-scaling. Why do I bring it up? It's because it has now just been accepted. Whoops. Nope. There we go. This one. Wrong order. Kata has been moved into the CNCF sandbox, so this brings a couple really cool things to Kata. First, it brings the actual support of the CNCF, but another thing that it does is it ensures that Kata will stay under the Apache 2 license. So that's one of the problems that some open source projects suffer from, especially corporate-backed open source projects, is that they get relicensed. Grafana is an example of that. And this is against what the CNCF allows. So we now know that the CNCF will require this since it's accepted in to remain the Apache 2. So you can actually depend on this. And another thing that the CNCF support brings is you know that there's going to be developers backing it, basically, for the most part. Not always, and sometimes the CNCF lets projects go, but that's generally because people aren't using them and there's not interest there for them. So if you don't know what Kata is basically they try to make auto scaling simple. It's a event-based auto scaling for Kubernetes. Now you might say that Kubernetes has some auto scaling stuff in there, but if you actually use just the bare Kubernetes stuff, you'll know where this lacks. So Kata is actually pretty cool. I have not used this in production yet, but I am actually looking forward to testing some of it out. So a lot of your cloud providers bring you auto scaling like Kata does. So basically, if you're running, if you're running Kubernetes in the cloud already at like your GKE or EKS or AKS clusters, they already bring some event-driven auto-scaling, but this isn't baked into Kubernetes. This is part of your cloud provider. Just like load balancers aren't a part of Kubernetes, those are part of your cloud provider. And so this is bringing some of that. So this is actually pretty cool for something like a bare metal cluster or one that's not provided by your cloud provider. So definitely worth checking out and looking into. All right, this is their announcements. All right, so here is another how to secure your control plane. Just wanted to shout it out. It was a good read, a lot of configuration. If you're not getting the hint of today's security is configuration. And I'll leave links to this as well for you to read. But yeah, definitely was really good. And then Linkerd. Linkerd, if you don't know what Linkerd is, there are these things that are called service meshes. That's what they're called. Sorry, sometimes names escape me, but there's these things called service meshes, and Linkerd is one of those that they do observability, not observability, well, yes, observability, security, reliability, and they allow you to provide your services as a service, basically, inside your cluster. So Linkerd is one of them. Now, you might be asking what other ones are, and you're probably familiar with something called Istio. Now, why I bring up Linkerd is because Linkerd solves a very specific problem that Istio does not. So Istio is great. It has all the features that you could want, but it is super complicated. It's hard to install. It's hard to maintain. Linkerd, in my experience, is simple. Now, it lacks one critical feature that Istio provides, that if you want, you just need to use Istio. But if you're looking for service meshes, you should definitely look into Linkerd because I think it's just the simple solution for most of your workloads. Now, the one thing that it doesn't have, if you're looking for it, is multi-cluster support. So if you're wanting a single Linkerd control plane spread out across multiple Kubernetes clusters, there is no support for that in Linkerd as of just yet. I don't know their roadmap 100%, so I couldn't tell you if it exists in that, but that doesn't exist right now. And that is something that's in Istio. So if that's something you're looking for, you probably need to go with Istio. The other thing that Istio has over Linkerd is it has a larger community backed by Google itself. So there's that. But the other thing that's kind of a negative is Google pretty much refused to give it to the CNCF. So Google is maintaining ownership over Istio. So there's your pros and cons. Anyways, let's move on. Let's move on to some other cloud technology. Ubuntu gets certified for secure regulated workloads. This is more like just knowing what you base your base off of. Yeah, that was not a great sentence. But basically what this is looking into is if you're trying to get into many government agencies or things like that, you got to actually base your OS off of a secure OS. So Ubuntu now has obtained that security clearance. Before Ubuntu, I think the only ones that I knew of were Red Hat. Yeah, I think Red Hat was the only one that I knew of specifically. So anyways, knowing what OS you're working off of, Ubuntu 2004 now has obtained that. Earlier versions of Ubuntu also had that regulatory clearance. This is just for the 2004 long-term support. So anyways, the newest version of Ubuntu has the support. All right, this was I guess we're on to the kind of random, but not really random because we actually have these. Let's talk about these first. Basically, CentOS was kind of, or CentOS, I call it CentOS. I think that's what makes sense, but there's people that call it CentOS. CentOS was, or CentOS, and now I'm even confused as what I call it. CentOS was kind of the open source Red Hat distribution, and Red Hat decided that it shouldn't be a downstream of Linux or of Red Hat. Now, I covered this earlier this year, and what came out of this was 2 new versions of downstream Red Hat compliant OSs. So these basically are exactly the same as Red Hat, just open source. If you're saying, Merrick, Red Hat is open source, you'd be partially correct, but RHEL is not freely available. Now, Red Hat does a lot of open source, but not all of most of their stuff is based on open source. And they do a lot of open source stuff. This is not me hating on them. I'm just clarification. All right, so Alma Linux is one of them. And this Alma actually just became available on Azure, the Azure Marketplace. So you can, Microsoft is actually sponsoring Alma. Now, Azure is also sponsoring Rocky, which is the other one that we're talking about. And Rocky is another open source downstream version of RHEL. So if you're looking for an open source, this is a fantastic enterprise grade Linux. Rocky really has my support over Alma. Alma is controlled by a corporation that's trying to... The reason I don't like Alma, and this is nothing against the actual project itself, but the problem with Alma is that it's actually controlled by this corporation. No, they don't link to. I think it's not Clear Linux. Cloud Linux. It's actually owned and controlled by this Cloud Linux, and the confusing part is Alma Linux actually is conflicting with Cloud Linux. So I'm a little worried that at some point they change the product just a little bit because it conflicts with their Cloud Linux here. We'll see. We'll see. Probably not. It's probably safe to use. That's just my worry with it. But yeah. Anyways, I do really like Rocky Linux. They're the people that were behind CentOS as well. And so, yeah. All right. Moving on to this blog article, not from GitHub like usual, is a blog on a person's take from a single repo to multiple repos to a mono repo to a multi-mono repo architecture. It was an interesting read. I don't actually agree with everything this person says. And a lot of it comes down to is how you want to use your repository, how your actual architecture for your applications is, and more importantly, how your teams are formed and created. Because a lot of the times you'll actually find that a lot of the things we do is to support how our teams work on code. And so how you maintain and have repositories really probably should be based around that as well, and how you are organized as a company as a whole. Now, you'll hear people talk about Google's mono repo and things like that, and you can make any way work. It doesn't mean that it works the best way. And I would actually say that Google doesn't use a single mono repo anymore. There are still mono repos there, but they're broken up a little bit differently. Anyways, good article, and they really do break down the issues in each one. So each one, they'll have issues with a single repository, and they break it down, and they break down what each type is. So it's still a good article to read and just think critically about. All right, now we're going to move on to the open source project shout out. All right. In this section, we are going to just cover a little bit about, today, it's going to be about Rust. So I know that I've talked a lot about Rust, but I haven't done a whole lot of Rust videos. And one of the reasons is I don't know how to do a video on a language, honestly, and make it fun and entertaining and educational at the same time. Once I figure that out, I will make that video for you guys. I can do I've thought about doing a class with like how to get started in Rust, and just do like very little short 5 minutes. This is how you do this in Rust. And maybe I'll do those. And if you guys have any ideas, please let me know. But what I thought I would do today is make all the projects about Rust. And these are ones that I think are absolutely needed if you're going to start doing almost anything in Rust, whether it's a command line application or even a web front end. So stick with me. And these projects are the ones that I think are the most needed for pretty much any project. And I do hope that you guys have liked the organization. I tried to make this A little bit more organized, and B, be a little bit more direct and to the point for each step of the way. If you do actually like that, please make sure to hit that like button and let me know that you liked it. And if you didn't like it, please don't hit that dislike button. That hurts. Just tell me why you didn't like it and how I could make it better, and that would be better. That would be better. All right, let's jump over back into this and let's look at these projects. All right, so no language is really complete without the effects of the blockchain. And so I thought, why not show you guys some blockchains? Now, this is not a very good logo here. You can barely read it. It's Solana. Yeah. It's because I have a dark theme and this is black. It's supposed to be black on white, but it doesn't work very well. Anyways, Solana is a proof of history blockchain, and it's written in Rust and open source. So this is the Apache 2, even though it doesn't, I don't know why it doesn't know that it's the Apache 2. It is the Apache 2. Anyways, it's really cool. You can go check out their proof of history blockchain right here in Rust. So it's a great way to learn. And yes, it's a joke because blockchain basically infiltrates everything, every good thing. But because it's a good joke, I thought Open Ethereum is also a good one. So here's your more blockchain. These are not absolutely needed. So let's move on to the actual needed things. Proto-buffers. Because we're CNCF, cloud native type of channel. I'm not really a CNCF channel, but anyways, because I cover a lot on Kubernetes, proto-buffers is a huge thing. So Rust proto-buffer is a must-have Rust library to empower your Rust or proto-buffer workloads in Rust. It's under the permissive MIT license, which I really appreciate. Next one is Slog. Slog is not the de facto logging, but it is one of the main logging ones, and I really like Slog, and it solves a lot of problems for logging in Rust. Ooh, sorry. All right, so definitely go check that out if you're looking to log anything in Rust. You know what? I forgot one in here, Vector. Vector is another Rust project you should check out. It's not really for creating applications. It's really more used in your distributed application. But tracing, this is from the creators of Tokyo, which we'll talk about in a little bit. Tracing is a framework for instrumenting Rust programs, and you should be doing that if you're wanting to know anything about your application as it runs. So this is definitely one of the de facto tracing applications in Rust. There are others. I'm giving you the ones I know, and the ones that I think solve the problem as elegantly as possible. Not necessarily always the best, because there are 50 different logging solutions, and really which one works best for you might depend on what you're trying to solve. So I'm just giving you options when you go into this, go into doing Rust yourself. All right, Tokyo is basically the asynchronous runtime for Rust. If you're wanting green threads and the easy compatibility, Tokyo really is the de facto runtime. Has huge support and is a pretty fantastic project. So if you're looking for event-driven, non-blocking I/O platform, you're looking for Tokyo. There are a few others. Miro is one of them, but Tokyo is by far the largest supported one, and is pretty, I would say, the best one to get into if you're starting. Talking about that, you can't talk about that and not talk about web frontends. Now, this, I think, has slowed down a little bit, so I have some concerns. It's still active, but it seems like it's been stuck in this version 0.5 for a long time. But it's still active, and I really liked it when I played around with it about a year ago. The Rocket framework, it makes making a HTTP API really simple in Rust. And so, yeah, it's definitely worth checking out. There's also Axio's web framework. So if you're looking for web frameworks, this is definitely the place to get started. And I really do like how Rocket did it. So anyways, it's one to check out. All right, Tiny HTTP is another one. This is basically the smallest HTTP server in Rust. Now, I say that, I haven't actually tested against every HTTP server out there, but basically that's its goal, is to be as small of a HTTP server that it can be, while supporting everything that you would expect, like HTTPS, which I think is a requirement. So, yeah, and it even supports upgrading to WebSockets. So it's definitely worth checking out if you're looking for just the minimal HTTP server. Clap is one that I think is a must-have if you're looking for creating a command line. In Go, it's pretty straightforward. Almost everybody uses Cobra, although there are some other projects, and Clap is looking to make themselves that de facto the de facto command line interface for writing a command line application in Rust. That was also a bad English sentence. So definitely check Clap out. I have used them in the past, and I do like Clap. It is a great command line argument parser, and is definitely worth using. Like I've said with all of these, there are other options if you want, but yeah. Surdy, that's one, is how you pronounce this, is Surdy. I don't actually know that for sure. That's how I've always pronounced it. Me and my team had an argument on this, and we came to the conclusion that it's Surdy after a lot of Googling. And we're still not certain that's what everybody else calls it, but that's what we call it. So SERDI is basically your serialization library for Rust. The really cool thing about SERDI is it looks to solve serialization as a whole. It's not a JSON serializer. It is basically a serialization. I'm going to oversimplify this, but it's basically a serialization interface. And then specific implementations can be made based off of that. So you can use SERDI, and then you can use the JSON or the protobuffer or whatever. And it provides these serialize and deserializes derives, and basically makes it a low code or no code solution for serializing in just about anywhere. This serialization is one of the things that makes Rust so fantastic. So if you don't know what SERDI is and write Rust, you need to know what SERDI is and use it. Rayon is a data parallelism library for Rust. Basically, it takes your input and breaks it up and spreads it out across your cores. And so if you're looking at needing to do that and process a lot of data, which sometimes is what Rust is really good at, Rayon is definitely a good choice to check out. I've talked about Melanie Search before, and it's really great if you're looking for search. I mean, I would actually use this before Elasticsearch anyways, and so definitely check this out if you're wanting for a really fast, accurate search. Druid is a kind of interesting REST native UI. Now, it's very experimental, but so is any REST or Rust UI front end. So if you're looking for Rust UI, check this out and see if you like it. Another thing you could do with Rust for UI is something like React Native, where you write the backend in Rust so that you have this. Anyways, you could do something like that. But anyways, we're talking about Rust project here. React Native is not that. Clippy is a really cool I'm sorry. English is hard right now. Linting tool. It lets you lint your code, but it does a ton of extra things. And you can actually you can change the level of whether it's warn or deny on a lot of extra things. And basically it goes beyond the standard linting with things like whether it's wrong or might be useless code or things like that. So I think that every project should use Clippy at least a little bit. And basically, it's really great that it gives you this fine-grained control, because there's definitely things like maybe you want to have this because your cargo manifests really matter to you, and it allows you to do that. So I definitely think you should be using Clippy, and it really augments it quite well. Strum is basically something to make enums and strings easier in Rust. This is interesting for a couple of reasons. Enums in Rust are super powerful. One of the reasons to use Rust is their enums. Their enums are like nothing else in any other language. One of the things that hurts Rust is the fact that it's not C-like. If you look at Go or Python or any of those, they all are not Python. But anyways, they're all kind of C-like in how they're written. And Rust kind of diverges from that. And enums is another place they diverge, but for good reason. Their enums are one of the most powerful things. I'll have to show you guys something I did with enums that was actually really cool. And I'll show you that in another stream, possibly. But yeah. So here is your Rust and everything. I hope that you guys like. What about gRPC for Rust? Okay, gRPC for Rust is a good question. Thanks for bringing that up. gRPC, if you guys don't know, protobufers, gRPC uses protobufers, but gRPC itself is an RPC library that's default serialization, or I think any serialization. I think it's baked into gRPC. You can't change the serialization. Not that I know of. If you can, somebody should let me know. But yes. 1 second. I'm going to pull up something for this. That is a great question, though. The name of the project escapes me, so bear with me just a second. Here we go. All right, so good question. Thanks for bringing that up, Pavel. Let's go over here. Contain RS is a project which just is a little play around project. I have actually committed code to this, actually, and in here has some cool enums. Anyways, this is not a real project, but it does demonstrate how you could do gRPC, because basically that's the interface used in all of this. So if we check out the build RS, you're going to see basically here is this CRI API, which is a gRPC API for protobuffers. And this is this just building the protobuffers? Okay, maybe this is not the project to show you. Oh, I didn't even share my screen. Sorry, I don't search the internet live on stream. This is just... So I'm going to give you a couple. You can look for them. Tonic, I think, is the one that I'm looking for. Let me go ahead and look for Tonic. Here is Tonic. I'm not going to necessarily recommend this. I'm not recommending it either. I think it's probably fine. Tonic is a gRPC implementation of a Rust implementation of the gRPC framework. If you stick around for next week, I'll make sure to have a good recommendation on gRPC. It has been a pain in the past. It's not something that's necessarily well supported in the past. I'm not saying that it's not currently. It's just something that has been notorious. So this looks like it's built on top of Prost, Hyper, and Tokyo. So this looks good. Let's see. Looks like it supports all the things. Really, authentication is one of the things that you want to make sure that it supports. So yeah, this might be a good one. And it's under the MIT license. Perfect. So yeah, this is the one that comes to mind. So when you ask me what one comes to mind, it would be Tonic. Yep. I hope that answers your question. And thank you. That's a good question. Any other specific library implementations for Rust? I'm not sure that I'll know it off the top of my head, but I might. And if I can help you guys like that, let me know. Also, if you guys have questions like this, I do have a Discord. You're always more than welcome to ask questions like this and have a whole community of people help answer your questions. So go ahead and join that if you're wanting to then ask questions like, hey, does anybody recommend one of these? And then you get more than just my opinion, and we can all chat about it. All right, so that being said, join the Discord, and thanks for joining me, hanging out. I am going to end that here. One last thing before I end is, remember, I'm going to be doing a live stream on creating an operator that you guys have recommended. Now, at this point, I only have 2 operators, so if you've watched this far, I need you to recommend an operator for me. And we're going to vote on this probably later this week. So far, the 2 I have is a cryptocurrency operator, which I'm not sure we're going to be able to do because I'm not sure time requirements are going to let me do that, even making a proof of concept in 4 hours. Also, I'm not sure that I wouldn't just lose a ton of money, which I can't afford to do because I don't make any money doing this. So might not be able to do that one. I'm still thinking on it because it would be fun. And then the other one is basically allows you to label a pod with a label and basically make a sidecar in VS Code for that one. So right now that's the only viable one that I've thought been recommended. So if you have a silly, fun operator that you'd like to be made, Kubernetes operator made on live stream, like to see that, let me know and we'll have it voted on. Otherwise, you guys have a fantastic rest of your week. I hope that this was helpful, useful, entertaining. And if you get 500 viewers, not active viewers, but like my average of 500 viewers, I'm going to then make it into a podcast for you guys. It's extra work, and I'm not going to do the extra work until there's actually people that would appreciate it. So if you guys like this on a podcast, go ahead and hit that like and subscribe button and get this up to 500 weekly viewers. That's my random goal for I'll do the extra work to make it a podcast. All right. You guys have a fantastic week, and I will see you next week.